The mysterious world, the forest was alive with strange sounds. Tall trees with glowing leaves reached high into the dark sky. The air was thick with mist, and every shadow seemed to hide a secret. The alien mother walked carefully, holding her little daughter's hand. Her large eyes scanned the path, searching for danger. The child, no more than 7 years old, clung to her mother's side. She was small, fragile, yet curious. Her tiny fingers held tightly onto her mother's arm. Afraid of being left alone in the endless forest? The mother knew this land was not safe. Rumors spoke of hunters, silent killers who used arrows tipped with poison. They attacked without warning. They spared no one, not even children. That was why the mother's steps were slow and careful. Every sound made her ears twitch. Every movement of the trees made her heart beat faster. Still, she had no choice but to travel. Their old village had been burned down. Now she had to find a safe place for her child. The forest was beautiful, but its beauty hid danger. Glowing insects floated in the mist, making it look almost magical. Strange animals with 6 legs crawled in the undergrowth. The child looked at them with wide eyes. She wanted to stop to ask questions, but her mother whispered, "Keep walking. Do not stop. Not here." The child nodded, silent, sensing her mother's fear. Night began to fall. The sky turned a deep purple, and the glowing leaves lit the path. The mother thought it might be safe to rest, just for a moment. She sat beside a fallen tree and pulled her daughter close. The child leaned her head on her mother's chest, listening to the steady heartbeat that made her feel safe. For a brief moment, it almost felt peaceful. But then the sound came. A sharp whistle cut through the air. The mother's eyes widened. She knew that sound. An arrow. She pushed her daughter to the ground and turned. Another whistle, another arrow. It flew fast, too fast to block. She stepped in front of her child, her arms spread wide. The arrow struck her shoulder with a sickening thud. Pain shot through her body, but she did not cry out. Her only thought was, "Protect her." The daughter screamed, her small voice echoing in the forest. The mother fell to her knees, her hand clutching the wound. Dark blood spilled down her arm, staining the glowing grass beneath them. But even in pain, she turned, shielding her daughter with her body. Figures moved in the mist. Shadows with bows in their hands. The hunters. Their eyes glowed faintly as they stepped closer, silent and deadly. The daughter trembled, tears streaming down her face. She tried to shake her mother, whispering, "Please, get up. Please." The mother's vision blurred, but she stayed strong, wrapping her arms around the child. She whispered weakly, "Do not be afraid. I am here." But inside, fear gripped her heart. She could not fight. She could not run. And her daughter would be next. The hunters raised their bows again. The mother closed her eyes, waiting for the end. Her only comfort was that she had shielded her child with her last breath. But then, something unexpected happened. A voice shouted in the distance, deep, commanding, and filled with anger. The hunters froze for a moment, confused. Out of the shadows, another figure stepped forward. Not alien, not one of their kind. This one was different. Tall, broad, wearing strange armor. A human. The hunters hesitated. They did not fear many things, but this creature was unknown to them. The human raised a weapon, something far more advanced than a bow. A sharp beam of light flashed from his hand, cutting through the mist. The hunters hissed in anger, retreating slightly, unsure of this new enemy. The daughter's eyes widened. She had never seen a human before. Her mother had told her stories of war, of betrayal, of destruction. But now, in this dark moment, it was a human who stood between them and death. The mother, weak and bleeding, looked up through her fading vision. For a moment, her fear was mixed with shock. Why was a human here? Why was he protecting them? Her strength gave out. She collapsed fully to the ground, still clutching her daughter close. The child screamed again, holding her mother's hand, her eyes filled with terror. The hunters drew back, preparing to strike once more. The human tightened his grip on his weapon. His eyes burned with determination. He stepped forward, ready to fight, and so, in the heart of the forest, under the glowing leaves and the endless mist, the story began with blood, with fear, and with a strange, fragile hope. The stranger appears. The mist parted as the human stepped closer. His boots pressed into the glowing grass, leaving faint marks of dirt behind. He was tall, his face half hidden by a cracked visor. His armor was scratched and battered as if he had fought many battles already. In one hand, he carried a strange weapon, humming faintly with energy. In the other, he held nothing, ready to reach, to fight. or to protect. The hunters hissed from the shadows, their glowing eyes fixed on him. They were not used to being challenged, especially not by a creature they barely understood. The human raised his weapon higher, his voice rough and sharp. "Stay back," he barked, his words lost on the alien hunters who could not understand him. But they understood the tone. It was the sound of defiance, the sound of someone who would not run. The alien child clung to her mother, her small body trembling. She peeked from behind her mother's arm and stared at the stranger. She had heard of humans before, stories whispered by elders. Humans were destroyers, warriors who brought fire and ruin wherever they walked. But this one was different. His eyes did not shine with cruelty. They burned with something else. Anger, yes, but also protection. The mother, weak from the arrow wound, tried to lift her head. Her vision was fading, but she saw the human standing before them. For a moment, fear washed over her. Her people had fought against humans in the past. Could he be trusted? Or was this just another trick, another cruelty? The hunters moved, breaking her thoughts. They spread out in the mist, circling slowly. They knew arrows alone would not break this man. They needed to close in, to strike from every side. One raised his bow, string pulled tight. The whistle of the arrow cut the air. The human moved fast. With a sudden burst, his weapon fired. A beam of light tore through the mist and struck the arrow mid-flight, shattering it into sparks. The hunters froze for half a breath. No one had ever broken their arrows so easily. The human shouted again, his voice echoing through the forest. Then he took a step forward, fearless. The hunters hissed and backed away, but not far. They were waiting for an opening. The child pressed her face into her mother's chest, whispering, "Mama, will he help us?" Her voice shook, filled with both hope and fear. The mother wanted to answer, but her throat was dry, her voice weak. She looked again at the human, her blood dripping onto the glowing grass. She didn't know who he was, why he was here, or what he wanted, but right now he was the only thing keeping her daughter alive. The human glanced back at them for a brief moment. His eyes softened when he saw the child crying. He nodded once as if promising something without words. Then his face hardened again and he turned back to the hunters. The standoff grew tense. The hunters hissed louder, their claws scratching the ground. The human's grip tightened on his weapon. His chest rose and fell with steady breaths like a predator ready to strike. Finally, the hunters broke. 3 of them leaped forward at once, moving with silent speed. The human reacted instantly. His weapon fired, the beams cutting through the mist. One hunter fell with a scream, smoke rising from his chest. Another dodged but stumbled, wounded. The third reached close, slashing with a curved blade. The human dropped his weapon and met the blade with his armored arm. Sparks flew as metal scraped against metal. With his free hand, he swung hard, striking the hunter's jaw. The creature collapsed into the glowing grass. The forest echoed with cries of rage. The remaining hunters pulled back, fading into the mist once again. They did not expect such resistance. They would not forget it. Silence returned, broken only by the sound of the mother's heavy breaths. The child clutched her tighter, still crying. The human picked up his weapon and scanned the trees. For a moment he thought they might return, but the forest stayed still. Slowly he lowered the weapon and turned toward the fallen mother and her daughter. His steps were heavy but careful, as if he did not want to frighten them. He crouched down, his visor catching the glow of the forest. The child's eyes met his. She shrank back, still afraid, but she did not look away. The human reached into a pouch on his belt and pulled out a small pack. From it, he took a strip of fabric. He gestured toward the mother's wound, then looked at the child. "I can help," he said softly, though he knew they might not understand his words. The child blinked, unsure. She looked to her mother. The alien mother, weak and pale, struggled to stay awake. She had heard his tone. Not cruel, not mocking, just steady. With a slow nod, she allowed him closer. The human knelt beside her, carefully pressing the fabric against the bleeding wound. The mother winced but did not push him away. The child watched closely, her tears slowing. For the first time that night, she felt a flicker of hope. The hunters had not won. And the stranger, the human, was not leaving. The fight for survival. The forest did not stay silent for long. The mist shifted again, carrying faint sounds of movement. The hunters had not given up. They were still out there, waiting in the shadows, circling like wolves. The human knew this. His eyes scanned the dark trees. searching for shapes that did not belong. His grip tightened on his weapon. Behind him, the alien mother leaned weakly against the fallen tree. Her wound still bled, though less than before. The child sat close to her, eyes wide, watching the human with a strange mix of fear and trust. She whispered, "Mama, will they come back?" The mother's voice was faint. "Yes, they will." She looked at the human who was standing like a wall between them and the unseen danger. "But he will fight." The child's small fingers dug into the grass. She wanted to believe. She wanted to feel safe. The whistle came again, an arrow cutting through the mist. The human turned fast, raising his weapon. A flash of light, and the arrow shattered mid-air. Another followed, then another. Each one was blocked, destroyed before it reached them. But for every arrow he stopped, 2 more came from new angles. The human gritted his teeth. They were testing him, measuring him. These hunters were not mindless killers. They were skilled, patient, and clever. From the left, a shadow moved fast. A hunter leapt forward, blade raised high. The human fired, but the mist made the shot go wide. The hunter was already too close. With a roar, the human swung his armored arm, blocking the blade. Sparks flew as steel met steel. He shoved the hunter back with raw strength, then fired again, striking it in the chest. The body fell silent, glowing blood spilling into the grass. But more came. 2 hunters rushed from behind. The human spun, but not fast enough. One blade slashed across his side, cutting into the armor. Pain shot through him, sharp and burning. He growled, ignoring it, and struck the nearest hunter with the butt of his weapon. The creature fell back, stunned. The second leapt high, aiming for his head. Before the strike could land, a rock flew from the ground. The small alien child had thrown it, tears still on her face but fury in her eyes. The rock struck the hunter's shoulder. It was not strong, but it was enough. The human turned, raised his weapon, and fired. The hunter screamed as it collapsed to the ground. The child froze, shocked at her own action. The human glanced back at her for half a second, his eyes softening. Then he returned to the fight. The hunters hissed from the mist. They had lost more than they expected, but they were not done. Their arrows whistled again, dozens of them now. The human ducked low, covering the mother and child with his body. Some arrows hit his armor, cracking the plates. Others shattered in the glowing grass. He was outnumbered, outmatched. His armor was damaged, his weapon growing hot in his hands. Still, he did not move. He would not let them pass. The mother, weak but awake, watched him. In her heart, confusion grew. She had been taught to fear humans, to hate them, but here this one risked his life for her and her child. Why? What did he gain? The thought burned in her mind as she clutched her daughter close. Then, the forest shook. A loud howl cut through the mist. The hunters froze. Even the human tensed, his eyes searching the darkness. From the far side of the forest, another danger was coming. Something larger, heavier. The hunters hissed to each other in their strange tongue, retreating into the shadows. They were killers, but even they did not want to face the beast that had awakened. The human took the chance. He turned, grabbing the mother by the arm. "We have to move," he said firmly, though he knew she might not understand. His voice carried urgency. The child looked up, frightened. "Mama?" The mother, dizzy from blood loss, gave a weak nod. She did not trust the human fully, but she knew he was right. If they stayed, they would all die. The human lifted her carefully, his strength surprising. The mother gasped in pain but did not resist. He carried her in one arm and motioned for the child to follow. The mist thickened as they ran. Arrows whistled again in the distance, but none found their mark. The hunters were too busy retreating from the greater danger. The child stumbled, but the human reached back with his free hand, steadying her without slowing down. His breath was heavy, his side still bleeding from the cut, but he pushed forward. Survival was all that mattered now. They reached a cluster of stone cliffs half covered in glowing vines. The human slipped into a narrow opening, pulling them inside. The cave was dark, damp, but safe for the moment. He set the mother gently on the ground. She winced, clutching her wound. The child stayed by her side, her small hands trembling. The human leaned against the wall, breathing hard. His armor was cracked, blood seeping from his side, but his eyes were still sharp, scanning the cave entrance. For now, the hunters were gone. For now, they had survived. But the night was far from over. The rescue. The cave was damp and cold. Water dripped slowly from the ceiling, echoing in the silence. The glow of the forest outside barely reached inside, leaving them in dim shadow. The human set the alien mother down against the wall, careful not to jolt her wound. She winced, biting back a cry, her face pale with pain. The child crouched beside her mother, her small hands pressing gently at the wound, trying to stop the bleeding. Her wide eyes never left the stranger, the human, who now knelt across from them, pulling open a small pouch strapped to his armor. He pulled out strips of cloth, a small metal box, and a vial of clear liquid. His hands were steady, though his breathing was heavy from the fight. He looked at the mother, then at the wound on her shoulder. The arrow was still lodged deep. The child tensed. She held her mother's hand tightly, whispering in her language, "Mama, don't leave me, please." The mother touched her daughter's face, weakly smiling despite the pain. Then she looked at the human. Her eyes narrowed in mistrust. He was the enemy, or at least he had always been called that. Yet here he was, preparing to save her life. The human met her gaze. He did not speak her language, but he understood her fear. Slowly he raised one hand, palm open, as if to say, "I will not harm you." Then he pointed to the arrow in her shoulder and shook his head. If it stayed, she would die. The mother closed her eyes. She gave the faintest nod. The human moved quickly. He snapped a small stick from his kit and handed it to the child, motioning for her to place it in her mother's mouth. The girl hesitated, not understanding at first. But when the human mimed biting down, she realized what it was for. The mother gritted her teeth on the stick. The human gripped the arrow firmly. He took a deep breath, then pulled. The sound tore through the cave, the ripping of flesh, the crack of bone. The mother's muffled scream shook the air. Her daughter clutched her tighter, tears falling fast. The arrow came free at last, dripping with dark blood. The human worked fast. He poured the clear liquid into the wound. The mother jerked in pain, the burn searing like fire. The child cried out, "Stop! You're hurting her!" She moved to push him away, but her mother, barely conscious, held her daughter's hand and shook her head weakly. The human wrapped the wound with cloth, tying it tight. His hands were rough, but his movements careful, almost gentle. He pressed his palm against the bandage, applying pressure to stop the bleeding. His own side bled beneath his armor, but he ignored it. Minutes passed, heavy and tense. Finally, the mother's breathing slowed. Her body relaxed, her eyelids heavy. She had not died. Not yet. The child wiped her tears with trembling hands. She looked at the human, her voice small. "Thank you." She wasn't sure if he understood, but her heart told her to say it. The human only nodded. He sat back against the cave wall, wiping the blood from his gloves. His face was tired, shadowed, but his eyes stayed fixed on the cave entrance. He knew the hunters were still out there. He also knew the forest beast's howl meant a new danger lurked nearby. Silence filled the cave again, broken only by the drip of water and the faint breathing of the wounded mother. The child sat close, her head resting on her mother's chest. But every few moments her eyes turned to the human. Curiosity burned inside her. Why was he here? Why had he saved them? The human finally spoke, his voice low, almost to himself. "You'll live." He looked at the mother, then at the little girl. His tone carried no malice, no threat, only certainty. The child tilted her head, not understanding the words, but sensing the calm in his voice. Slowly she crawled toward him, cautious like a small animal. She sat a few steps away, hugging her knees. The human glanced at her, then pulled a small silver packet from his pouch. He opened it, revealing dried rations. He took one piece, chewed slowly, then offered another piece to the girl. She hesitated, staring at the strange food. Her stomach growled softly. She reached out with tiny hands, took it, and nibbled carefully. The taste was strange, salty, but it filled her empty belly. For the first time that night, she felt a little less afraid. Her mother stirred faintly, whispering her daughter's name. The girl rushed back to her, holding her hand. "I'm here, Mama." The human leaned his head back against the stone. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, but his weapon stayed close to his hand. Sleep would not come easily. Not here. The night dragged on. Outside, the forest shifted with distant howls and whispers. The hunters were not gone. The beast still roamed. And in the cave, 3 strangers, once enemies, now bound by survival, shared the same fragile shelter. The mother, weak but alive, the daughter, scared but brave, and the human, scarred but unyielding. None of them knew what dawn would bring. But for now they breathed the same air, shared the same fear, and carried the same fragile hope. The bond grows. The cave was still and quiet when morning came. Faint light slipped through the cracks in the stone, painting the walls in pale colors. The forest outside hummed with strange voices. birds with metallic calls, insects that glowed brighter in the daylight. But inside the cave, the world felt small, heavy with silence. The human opened his eyes first. His back ached from sleeping against stone, but he did not move right away. He listened. No footsteps, no arrows, no growls from the beast. For now they were safe. He looked to the mother and child. The mother slept, her breathing shallow but steady. The bandage around her wound was stained, but holding. Her face, once pale with pain, now had a little more color. The child was curled beside her, arms wrapped protectively around her mother as if her small body could shield her. The human let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He pulled a small piece of ration from his pouch, chewed slowly, and watched the cave entrance. His eyes were sharp, always searching, always ready. But inside, something had begun to change. He had fought in battles, seen enemies fall, heard children cry in burning villages. But this was different. He had chosen to stay. He had chosen to fight, not for orders, not for duty, but for them. For the mother who had shielded her daughter with her own body. For the child who had thrown a stone at a hunter to protect him. The child stirred awake. Her eyes blinked open, catching the light. At first she looked frightened, as if expecting the hunters, but then she saw the human, sitting silently with his weapon across his lap. Her small body relaxed, though not completely. She whispered something in her language, pointing at the food in his hand. He tilted his head, then tore a piece off and handed it to her. She reached out slowly, almost shyly, and took it. Her little fingers brushed against his glove. She tasted the food, wrinkling her nose at the strange flavor, but kept chewing. Hunger made her brave. The mother awoke next. Her eyes fluttered open, heavy with pain. She groaned softly, trying to sit up, but the wound pulled at her strength. The human leaned forward quickly, holding out a hand to steady her. She hesitated, staring at his hand as if it were a weapon, but when her daughter looked at her and nodded, she allowed his support. The human pointed to the bandage, then raised an eyebrow as if asking, "Pain, better?" The mother understood enough. She gave the faintest nod. Her lips pressed together, but her eyes softened slightly. For the first time, she did not see him only as an enemy. The child spoke to her mother in soft tones, her words quick and full of questions. The mother answered weakly, then looked back at the human with a strange expression. Not trust, not yet, but something closer to acceptance. Time passed slowly. The human stood at the cave mouth, watching the forest. The mother rested, regaining strength. The child, restless, moved between them. She would sit by her mother, then wander near the human, watching him with curious eyes. At one point, she pointed at his weapon. He shook his head firmly, holding it close. Her curiosity grew, but she understood it was dangerous. Instead, she pointed at the glowing vines outside the cave. She spoke a word softly. The human frowned, not understanding. She repeated it, pointing again. Then she tugged gently at his arm. Pulling him closer to the cave entrance, he followed, cautious. She touched the vines and made the word again. Then she tore a piece and placed it in his hand. The vine pulsed faintly, glowing like fireflies. The human turned it in his hand, fascinated. She laughed, a small, soft laugh that carried through the cave. Her mother stirred at the sound, her lips twitching with the ghost of a smile. In that moment, the cave felt less like a prison and more like shelter. But the bond did not grow without shadows. The mother still watched him carefully, her eyes filled with questions. She had seen humans bring fire, war, and ruin. Could she truly trust this one? Or was this kindness only temporary? The human, too, felt the weight of silence. He could not explain himself. He could not tell them why he was here, why he had saved them. His language was foreign, his words useless. All he had were his actions, so he kept watch. He shared his food. He changed her bandage. And slowly, the distance between them began to shrink. That night, as the forest outside grew loud again, the child fell asleep beside her mother. The human sat near the fire he had built, its glow faint but warm. He looked at the two of them, lying close, holding on to each other. For the first time in years, he felt something he thought he had lost. Purpose. Not in orders, not in missions, but in protecting life, fragile and small in a world full of danger. The mother opened her eyes, catching his gaze. They did not speak. They could not. But in that silence, something passed between them. An understanding, fragile but real. Enemies once. Survivors now, bound not by choice but by need. And in that bond, a new story had begun. The greater danger, the forest outside the cave, had grown too quiet. No birds sang. No insects buzzed. Even the trees, whose glowing leaves usually shifted with wind, seemed frozen. The silence was heavy, like the breath held before a storm. The human knew this kind of silence. He had heard it before in battlefields where death waited in the shadows. He sat near the mouth of the cave, weapon ready, eyes locked on the mist. His body ached, his side still bleeding under cracked armor, but he did not move. The alien mother stirred, her wound pulling at her strength. She leaned against the wall, watching him. She could not hear what he heard, but she saw it in his body, the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes never blinked. Her heart tightened. Something was coming. The child, still half asleep, whispered, "Mama." "What's wrong?" The mother stroked her daughter's hair, though her own fear was rising. "Stay close," she whispered back. Then it began. From the mist came the hiss of voices. The hunters. Their shadows stretched across the trees, moving carefully, circling like predators. But this time they were not alone. Heavy footsteps shook the earth, slow and powerful. A low growl rolled through the air, deeper than thunder. The child froze, eyes wide. Even the mother's face turned pale. She knew that sound. It was the beast of the forest, the one even hunters feared. It was larger than 10 men, armored with natural plates and hungry for blood. The hunters had not come to fight alone. They had awakened the beast, and now they pushed it forward like a living weapon. The human rose to his feet, gripping his weapon tightly. His jaw clenched as the sound grew louder, closer. He had fought enemies before, but this was different. This was not an army, not a soldier. This was nature itself, wild and unstoppable. The child whimpered. The mother's hand shook as she pulled her daughter close. She looked at the human, her eyes filled with silent questions. "What will you do? Can we survive this?" The human did not answer. He stepped forward instead, out of the cave into the mist. The hunters hissed, their bows raised, their glowing eyes locked on him. Behind them, the beast emerged. Its massive body pushed through the trees, breaking trunks with each step. Its skin glistened with armor-like scales, and its mouth split open into rows of jagged teeth. Its roar shook the ground, echoing into the night. The human did not retreat. He stood tall, weapon steady. The hunters laughed in their strange voices. To them, he was nothing but prey standing against a storm. They released their arrows, dozens at once. The human fired, his weapon flashing with light. Arrows shattered mid-air, some striking his armor but failing to pierce. He moved with precision, striking hunters one by one. 2 fell screaming, their bodies hitting the glowing grass. But the others kept coming. Then the beast charged. Its roar split the night as it thundered toward him, earth shaking under its weight. The human fired again, his beam striking its chest. The shot burned its scales, but it did not slow. He dove aside just as its massive claws smashed into the ground, stone and dirt flying. The hunters spread out, driving him toward the beast. The human gritted his teeth. He was trapped between 2 enemies, intelligent killers and a mindless monster. The mother watched from the cave, her breath shallow. Her heart screamed at her to run, to take her daughter and flee, but her body was weak, her wound heavy. And deep inside something told her if he fell they would not survive. The child pulled at her mother's arm. "Mama, help him!" The mother's eyes filled with conflict. She had once hated humans. She had once sworn never to trust them. But now this one fought for her child, for her life. She could not let him stand alone. With trembling hands she pushed herself up. She whispered to her daughter, "Stay here. Do not move." Then, using the cave wall for support, she stepped out into the mist. The human saw her and shook his head sharply, motioning for her to go back. But she ignored him. She pressed her hand to the glowing vines, tearing them free. The plant pulsed with light, releasing a sharp scent into the air. She raised it high and shouted in her tongue. The beast stopped for a brief moment. Its massive head turned toward her. The hunters hissed in alarm. They knew this plant. The scent drove the beast into frenzy. The mother threw the glowing vines at the hunters. The beast roared, its eyes locking on them. It charged, tearing through their ranks with unstoppable force. Arrows scattered. Screams filled the air as hunters were crushed beneath its claws. The human seized the chance. He fired again and again, striking down the hunters who tried to retreat. The air burned with light, smoke, and blood. The beast, now wild and blind with rage, turned toward the human. He steadied himself, weapon raised. But before it could strike, the mother called out again, her voice loud and clear. She had no weapon, no strength, but her voice carried command. The beast roared and turned away, charging deeper into the forest. The ground shook as it disappeared into the distance. Silence returned. The mist settled. The hunters were gone, their bodies scattered. The human lowered his weapon, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. His armor smoked, his side bled, but he was still standing. The mother collapsed to her knees, her strength gone. The child ran to her, wrapping small arms around her tightly. Tears streamed down her face. The human walked toward them slowly. He knelt before the mother, meeting her tired eyes. She looked at him not with fear this time, but with something else, respect. They had survived. Together. The final stand and hope. The night had almost ended. Pale light began to rise over the glowing forest, chasing away the mist. But peace had not yet come. The hunters, though scattered, were not defeated. Their numbers were many, and they had lost too much to retreat quietly. They would return. The human knew this. He leaned against the stone near the cave, weapon heavy in his hands. His body was weak, his side bleeding, his armor cracked. Every breath burned. Still, his eyes stayed sharp, watching the forest. The alien mother sat inside the cave, her daughter pressed against her side. The child had cried until she could cry no more. Now she only held her mother's arm, her eyes fixed on the human. She did not see him as a monster anymore. She saw him as a shield. The mother, though still in pain, felt the same. Her people had called humans destroyers, but this one had bled for her child, had fought when he could have run. She could no longer see him as the enemy. Then the sound came. Hissing voices, footsteps crunching against stone and grass. The hunters had returned, dozens of them, their glowing eyes shining in the dawn light. This time they came not with silence but with fury. They shouted in their strange tongue, beating their weapons together. The child clutched her mother tighter. "Mama." The mother pulled her close, whispering, "Do not look away. Stay with me." The human stepped forward out of the cave and faced the swarm alone. His weapon hummed as it powered up again, light flickering along its barrel. He was one man against an army, his body weak, his strength nearly gone. But he did not waver. The hunters laughed, spreading out, bows raised high. Their leader, taller than the rest, stepped forward with a blade carved from bone. He hissed something sharp and cruel. The human lifted his weapon and spoke, though they could not understand. "You'll have to go through me." The air cracked with light as he fired. Hunters fell, their bodies burning. Arrows whistled, striking his armor, one cutting across his arm. He gritted his teeth and kept moving. Each shot was precise, each movement strong, but his body grew heavier with every step. The hunters pressed closer, their numbers too many. The leader charged with his blade, swinging for the human's chest. The strike landed hard, shattering part of his armor. Pain exploded through his body. He staggered, almost falling, but then a scream. The alien mother had stepped out of the cave. She leaned on the stone for support, her wound still fresh, but her eyes burned with fire. In her hands she held one of the glowing vines. She tore it in half, the scent flooding the air. The hunters froze, hissing in alarm. Behind them the forest roared. The beast had returned, its massive body crashing through the trees. It bellowed, its eyes wild with rage, drawn again by the scent of the vines. The hunters panicked, their careful formation broken. Some turned to fight it, others to flee. The human saw his chance. With a roar of his own, he drove forward, striking the leader with the butt of his weapon. The hunter stumbled, dropping his blade. The human fired at close range, the blast throwing the leader to the ground. The beast rampaged through the rest, scattering them like dry leaves in a storm. The ground shook as it crushed them beneath its claws. Those who survived ran, their voices fading into the forest. Silence fell again, a heavy final silence. The human dropped to one knee, his weapon falling from his hand. His breaths came in harsh gasps. Blood dripped from his wounds, staining the glowing grass. He looked at the mother and child, his vision blurring. The child ran to him, her small hands pressing against his side. "Don't die," she whispered, though she knew he might not understand. "Please, don't die." The mother walked forward, her steps weak but steady. She knelt beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder. She looked into his eyes, and for the first time she spoke not as a stranger, not as an enemy, but as someone who owed him her life. "Together," she whispered in her own tongue. "We survived together." The human gave a faint smile, though pain still burned in him. He could not answer her words, but he felt their meaning. The dawn light broke fully, bathing the forest in gold. The beast had vanished into the trees. The hunters were gone. For the first time in days, there was no sound of arrows, no hiss of killers, no roar of monsters. There was only silence, a silence of survival. The child leaned against the human's arm, her face tired but calm. The mother sat beside them, her body weak but alive. And the human, though battered and scarred, was still breathing. They were no longer enemies. No longer strangers. They were survivors. And in that fragile bond, mother, child, and human, there was hope. Hope that perhaps their people did not need to stay enemies forever. Hope that even in a world filled with death and danger, something new could grow. Not just survival, but trust, not just fear, but peace. And as the sun rose higher, lighting the endless forest, the three of them stood together at the mouth of the cave, broken, scarred, but alive. The story of their fight would not end here. It had only just begun.